Hey everyone, I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. Now, before we get started, let's go back to an episode that I blogged back in late winter of 2016, which was The Secret Library, Olaf and the Tale of Miss Nettle. For those who don't remember, that episode was Princess Sofia's second Storykeeper mission. During that time, Sofia and Minimus traveled to Princess Hildegard's kingdom, Friesenberg, to stop a then evil fairy named Miss Nettle from stealing snowdrop flowers. Unfortunately, Sofia's amulet got jinxed by Miss Nettle's crazy crystals, where she temporarily lost her ability to talk to animals, and the amulet summoned the lovable snowman Olaf. Later on, Sofia learns that Miss Nettle was the one who created the snowdrop, and the royal gardener of Friesenberg stole them from her. So, Sofia and Olaf decide to reform Miss Nettle by having the citizens of Friesenberg honor her during the winter festival and renaming the snowdrop as Nettle Drop. Now, to this very day, I still stand by that this is one of my favorite episodes from Sofia the First back then, and I'm kind of happy that Miss Nettle was reformed in the end. But today, we're going to look back at the episode where we were first introduced to Miss Nettle at Royal Prep. Airing on television on August 23rd, 2013, this is Make Way for Miss Nettle. Now, in this episode, Princess Sofia attends Royal Prep's after-school gardening club with her brother, Prince James, and the timid and intelligent Prince Desmond. There, the children are introduced to the three good fairies' former apprentice, Miss Nettle, who volunteers to be the club's teacher. But little does Sofia know that Miss Nettle is up to no good. She imprisons the fairies in a magic bubble while she hunts for their spell book in order to overpower them. So, it's up to Sofia, James, and Desmond to find the spell book before Miss Nettle does and save the day. Now, my thoughts? Well, in my opinion, this episode was pretty twisted, and it kind of had me on the edge of my seat. And yeah, I thought it was pretty thrilling too. But to further explain why I enjoy this episode, let's move on to Mustang notes. Now, believe it or not, this episode was originally going to be titled as Fairy Fairy Quite Contrary. Now that sounds kind of reminiscent to a certain nursery rhyme that I knew about during my childhood. Also, the moral of this episode is true courage is being able to do something despite being scared. Now to me, that lesson is pretty tough, but at the same time, it's pretty simple now that I'm older. I mean, I had to face my fear of medicals in order to get protected from COVID, thanks to Moderna. As for the animation, well, I still stand by that the CGI animation by Toei is still great, and I like that this episode mainly takes place at Royal Prep. However, I don't think the greenhouse was ever shown until this episode, and to me, I think this place looks very beautiful, and the plants look very enchanting, like rising roses, dancing daisies, laughing lilies, bouncing bluebells, and singing sunflowers. Plus, we also get to see what's inside the school's clock tower, which is the place where the fairy's spellbook is hidden. At the top of the tower are 6 figures, 3 of which represent Flora, Fauna and Merryweather, and when the clock reaches a certain time, the figures march around in a circle, kind of similar to the dolls in the It's a Small World clock tower pre-show. However, since the tower has no stairs inside, the only way to reach the top is with flight. But since the kids can't fly, they instead make a giant rose stalk and climb it, kind of like in Jack and the Beanstalk. As for the story, well, in my eyes, like I said earlier, this had me on the edge of my seat, since this episode focuses on 3 royal children trying to get a spell book before it ends up in the wrong hands. Now let's talk about the episode's title/villain song, Make Way for Miss Nettle, sung by Miss Nettle herself, as the fairies confront her while she was trying to find the spellbook in their office. To me, this song is very twisted, especially when Miss Nettle traps the fairies in a magic bubble. However, during the song, Miss Nettle mentions that she's tired of being fairy number 4 and she thinks she deserves better. Plus, I just can't believe that she mentions Flora, Fauna and Merryweather's rival and my childhood nightmare, Maleficent. But little did Miss Nettle know that her song was witnessed by Sofia, who was trying to return her gardening gloves. And now let's move on to the characters and the voice actors. Princess Sofia is again voiced by Ariel Winter, best known as young Kyrie from the Kingdom Hearts games, Marina from Jake and the Neverland Pirates, Smurf Lily in Smurfs The Lost Village, and young Trixie in Speed Racer. Now, in my opinion, this is another episode where Sofia shows her leadership. Plus, I think Sofia is very brave for a then 7 or 8-year-old princess. She was 11 when the show ended, by the way. Plus, I think Sofia is very smart while coming up with clever ideas. Next we have Sofia's brother, Prince James, voiced again by Zach Callison, who voiced King Tut in Mr. Peabody and Sherman. In my opinion, James' role doesn't really add much, but he still shows his playful and silliness at times. Plus, he still makes a very supportive prince, like where he gave Desmond some advice about being royal and bravery. Our third main character, who just happens to be one of the newest in this episode, is Prince Desmond, voiced by Maxim Knight. This episode was Prince Desmond's first appearance, and he's considered to be the smartest student at Royal Prep. However, Desmond is quite timid, and he can be easily scared of almost anything, including his Aunt Nadine. On the other hand, he likes to be prepared, right down to bringing tools from home that he could need, like a pinch spoon for measuring plant food. Thankfully, Desmond shows his bravery by risking his own safety to help his friends, like when he jumps at Miss Nettle and takes her wand without her noticing. Next we have Aurora's aunts and the headmistresses of Royal Prep, the three good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, voiced by Barbara Derrickson, the late Rusty Taylor, and Trez McNeil. To me, as usual, these three are classic Disney fairies. However, I am kinda curious of when they ever had an apprentice prior to the show, aside from Sora and Lee in the Kingdom Hearts games. Anyway, after the fairies got trapped in a magic bubble, they give Sofia a clue to where their spellbook is hidden by marching around, since no one can hear them outside the bubble, and they're depending on the children to get their book before Miss Nettle does. Another character to talk about is Professor Popov, voiced by veteran voice actor Jim Cummings. If you folks don't remember him, he was last seen in the pilot special Once Upon a Princess, teaching dance class. However, in this episode, Professor Popov is shown staying late after school, and we learn that he hates evil fairies. When the kids get him for help, Popov tries to stop Miss Nettle from finding the headmistress's spellbook, but unfortunately, she traps him in a bubble too. And finally, we come to the titular character and then villain for the episode, Miss Nettle, voiced by Megan Mullally, whom was Jonathan's mom, Linda, in Hotel Transylvania 2, and she was in a raunchy comedy called Why Him, which my parents dragged me to see in theaters back in 2016. Blech. Also, she was in Once Bitten and Timeless Tales, The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Now, I'm sure at first glance, nobody ever suspected Miss Nettle to be a bad guy in the first place. When we first see her teaching Sofia, James, and Desmond about enchanted gardening, she seemed like a friendly and sweet fairy, especially when she put a rose in Sofia's hair. But she quickly shows her true colors while looking for Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather's spellbook, and her reason for being evil is because she's bored of being fairy number 4, and she would rather be more powerful. You know, while that may be kind of understandable, as much as Cedric and Prisma's motivations, it still makes Vor a more threatening villain. And now let's move on to my final words. Overall, Make Way for Miss Nettle was a very twisted and heart-pounding episode in this series. The animation by Toei is great, the episode's plot had me on the edge of my seat, Sofia made a great leader, her brother was pretty supportive, and Desmond was very memorable while also learning to be brave. As for Miss Nettle, well, she was a pretty surprising villain back then, though her true colors were shown pretty quickly. Plus, her song was also dark. Still, I'm glad that she became reformed 2 seasons later. However, in case you're wondering, yes, I will look at her second appearance, but that'll have to wait until next year. Anyway, I give this episode a 93% out of 100. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to join me next time, because we're going to look at a Disney sequel starring a one-of-a-kind Dalmatian puppy from London. Mustang Power.